The call lasted 4 seconds. At 11:09 p.m., on the evening of March 3, 2004, a woman called the Dawson County 911 Dispatch Center in Lexington, Nebraska. The line connected. The dispatcher, a 26-year-old woman named Trish Holbrook, who was 7 months into the job and working the overnight shift alone, heard a breath. Then a single word spoken once, clearly, deliberately, as if it had been chosen from among all possible words, and this one was the one that mattered. And then the line went dead. Trish attempted a callback. The number rang to voicemail. She dispatched a patrol unit to the address associated with the phone number on file, which was a farmhouse on Route 6, 4 miles east of town. The deputy arrived at 11:31 p.m. The front door was locked. The porch light was on. He knocked 3 times, waited, knocked again. Nothing. He circled the house. The windows were dark. He wrote it up as an abandoned call. No further action was recommended. The woman who had made the call was named Ruth Ann Teague. She was 44 years old. She was a 4th-grade teacher at Lexington Elementary School. She had lived in Dawson County her entire life. And after March 3, 2004, she was gone, not in the way people leave, but in the way people vanish, as though the evening had simply closed over her and sealed itself, and everything that followed was silence. The word she said on the phone was a name. It would take 19 years, a retired dispatcher with a tape she should not have kept, and a forensic audio analyst with equipment that did not exist in 2004 to determine, beyond the dispatcher's original uncertain transcription, exactly what name Ruth Ann Teague had spoken in the 4 seconds she had left. But before we get to any of that, before we get to the name, and to what it revealed, and to the man who heard himself identified in a courtroom by a dead woman's voice played from a recording that was never supposed to survive, you need to go back to Lexington, Nebraska in March of 2004. Because to understand what was lost on that phone call, you first have to understand who Ruth Ann Teague was. Ruth Ann Teague had grown up on a farm outside Cozad, 30 miles east of Lexington, the youngest of 4 children raised by a father who grew corn and soybeans, and a mother who ran the produce stand at the county market every Saturday, from April through October. She had been quiet as a child, deliberate in her work, and had known since she was 11 years old that she wanted to teach. She earned her degree in elementary education from the University of Nebraska, Kearney, in 1982. Took her first position at Lexington Elementary School that same fall, and had been there for 22 years by the spring of 2004, the longest tenured teacher on the faculty. She kept her classroom neat in a way that suggested deep conviction rather than obligation. She labeled every shelf. She arranged the reading corner with books she chose herself, rotating the selection monthly, and she spent a portion of her own salary each year buying new titles because the school's budget for 4th-grade classroom libraries had been the same fixed number since 1996. She had been married once, briefly, in her mid-20s. The marriage had ended without hostility, and the man had moved to Omaha, and Ruth Ann had returned to the farmhouse on Route 6, her parents' house, which she had inherited when her mother passed in 1998, and had lived alone since then. She had a border collie named June. She grew tomatoes in the side yard. She drove a white 2001 Chevy Silverado that she washed every Sunday morning before church, a habit so consistent that her neighbor, an elderly farmer named Eldon Grieve, had begun using the sound of her hose as his cue to start his own morning. In March of 2004, Lexington was the kind of town where the meatpacking plant employed half the county, and the rest of the county's economy existed in relation to the plant. The Iraq War was a year old, and the yellow ribbon magnets had appeared on half the trucks at the school parking lot. American Idol was on the television set in the teacher's lounge. The high school basketball team had made the state tournament, and the bank had put up a banner across its front windows. Lexington smelled, in the early spring, like thawing earth and cattle, and the particular metallic sweetness that drifted from the plant on days when the wind came from the south. Ruth Ann had been seeing someone for 7 months before she disappeared. His name was Garrett Pruitt. He was 47 years old and had moved to Dawson County 3 years earlier from Cheyenne, Wyoming, to manage the western Nebraska sales territory for an agricultural equipment company. He attended First Lutheran Church, where Ruth Ann also attended. He had a calm manner and good posture, and the kind of eye contact that, in a man of a certain age in a small Nebraska town, was read as confidence rather than calculation. He and Ruth Ann had been introduced by the pastor's wife at a church dinner in August of 2003. And by the following January, they had been to dinner together a number of times, and Ruth Ann had mentioned him to her sister-in-law, Janet, in a phone call that Janet would recall for investigators as the only time she had heard Ruth Ann sound genuinely happy about a man since her divorce. Janet would also recall, not in the first interview, but in the second, which took place 4 months later, that Ruth Ann had sounded different in their last phone call on March 1st. Not frightened, quieter, she had said something that Janet had not fully understood at the time. She had said she thought Garrett was not who she had believed he was. She did not elaborate. She said she was taking care of it. 2 days later, she called 911 and said one word. On March 4, 2004, Ruth Ann Teague did not arrive at Lexington Elementary School for the first time in 22 years. The principal, a man named Doug Pfister, who had worked with Ruth Ann for 11 of those years, called the farmhouse at 8:15 a.m. No answer. He called at 9 a.m. No answer. At 10:30 a.m. He drove to Route 6 himself and knocked on the door. The border collie was barking from inside. The white Silverado was not in the driveway. The porch light was still on. The morning paper was on the step. He called the Dawson County Sheriff's Office from the porch. Deputy Mike Talbert arrived at 11 a.m. The house was entered through the back door, which was unlocked. The kitchen was orderly. A coffee mug washed and set on the drying rack. A single-place mat on the table. A stack of graded spelling tests beside the telephone. June, the border collie, was in the living room. She had not been fed that morning. The bed in the master bedroom had been slept in. Ruth Ann's purse was on the nightstand. Her car keys were not in the house. The white Silverado was not on the property. The truck was located the following day, March 5th, in a rest area parking lot on Interstate 80 near Overton, 11 miles east of Lexington. The engine was cold. The keys were under the floor mat. Ruth Ann's school bag was on the passenger seat. Inside it, her grade book, a thermos, and a paperback novel with a receipt from the Lexington Walmart, used as a bookmark. Nothing appeared to have been taken. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed. She was not there. Detective Lyle Eberhardt of the Dawson County Sheriff's Department was assigned the case on March 6, 2004. He was 51 years old, 23 years in law enforcement. A man whose colleagues described him as systematic and unhurried, and whose private frustration with the limitations of a county sheriff's department operating on a fixed budget would become, over the next several months, a theme of the investigation's internal record. The first 72 hours produced a statewide alert, a canvass of Ruth Ann's known contacts, and a review of the 911 call log from the evening of March 3rd. The 911 call was reviewed on March 7th. Trish Holbrook, the dispatcher, was interviewed. She confirmed that she had heard a single word. She believed the caller had spoken a name, a first name, 1 syllable, possibly 2, but she could not, with confidence, reproduce it. The call had been brief, and the audio quality was poor, and the name, if it was a name, had been unfamiliar to her. She had written it in her log as unintelligible. The tape, the physical cassette on which the call had been recorded by the dispatch center's analog system, was reviewed by Eberhardt, who heard a breath, heard something, and could not determine what it was. The audio equipment available to the Dawson County Sheriff's Department in 2004 was not capable of isolating a single whispered word from the background noise of a 4-second call. The tape was logged as evidence. The call was noted in the file. The investigation moved forward. Garrett Pruitt was interviewed on March 8th. He was composed, attentive, and appropriately distressed. He told Detective Eberhardt that he had last seen Ruth Ann on the evening of March 2nd when they had had dinner at her farmhouse. He said she had seemed well. He said he had called her on the evening of March 3rd at approximately 9:00 p.m. And she had not answered. He said he had assumed she had gone to bed early. His phone records confirmed the 9:00 p.m. call. His account of the evening of March 3rd placed him at his rental property in Lexington. From 7 p.m. onward, a claim that could not be verified because he lived alone and the property had no security system. There was one element of Garrett Pruitt's background that Detective Eberhardt located during the first month of the investigation and that produced, in his case notes, a notation he would return to repeatedly over the years that followed. Before moving to Dawson County in 2001, Pruitt had lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Before Cheyenne, he had lived in Casper, Wyoming. Before Casper, he had lived in Pueblo, Colorado. 3 states. 3 addresses in 8 years. In Pueblo in 1997, a woman named Sandra Orozco had filed a restraining order against Pruitt that was granted by the county court, and that remained on file in the Colorado Judicial Database. The order cited a pattern of controlling behavior, surveillance, and implicit threat. Sandra Orozco had moved to Denver after the order was granted. Pruitt had moved to Casper. The restraining order had expired 2 years later without incident. Eberhardt noted the order. He noted the pattern of relocation. He spoke with Sandra Orozco by phone in April of 2004. She was reluctant. She confirmed the order. She said Pruitt had been, in her exact phrase, the most patient danger she had ever been near. She said she had been afraid of him for 4 years and that the fear had not been the dramatic kind. It had been quiet. It had been the fear of a man who never raised his voice. Eberhardt presented his findings to the county prosecutor in May of 2004. The prosecutor reviewed the case and concluded that there was insufficient physical evidence to file charges. No body had been recovered. No crime scene had been identified. The 911 tape was unintelligible. Pruitt's alibi was unverifiable, but also uncontradicted. The case remained open. It did not move. By 2007, 3 years on, Garrett Pruitt had left Dawson County. He had moved to Grand Island, 60 miles east, and was working in the same industry under the same name, with the same calm manner he had always carried. He had not been charged with anything. He attended church on Sundays. He dated a woman in Grand Island for 2 years, and then the relationship ended, and the woman declined to discuss it with anyone afterward. By 2010, Ruth Ann Teague's classroom at Lexington Elementary had been assigned to 2 different teachers in succession. A small framed photograph of Ruth Ann had been placed on the shelf beside the reading corner by the first teacher who followed her. It was still there when the second teacher arrived. Neither moved it. Neither discussed it with each other. It simply stayed. By 2014, Detective Eberhardt retired. He was 61 years old. He kept the Teague case file in his home office in a banker's box beneath a window. He did not reread it often. He did not need to. He had read it enough times to know its contents the way you know the floor plan of a house you have lived in for a long time, not by studying it, but by having walked it in the dark. By 2018, Eldon Grieve, The neighbor who had used the sound of Ruth Ann's hose on Sunday mornings to time his own day was 89 years old and had sold the farm and moved to an assisted living facility in Kearney. He told his grandson once that the quietest thing about Ruth Ann's disappearance was not the absence of her truck, or her voice, or her classroom. It was the absence of the hose on Sunday mornings. He said that was the thing that told him she was really gone. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, reading old files, tracing timelines, tracking down people who kept carrying things the system had set down. If that work matters to you, take a second to like and subscribe. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We read every one. Now let's get back to Ruth Ann. Trish Holbrook left the Dawson County 911 Dispatch Center in 2006. She moved to Lincoln with her husband, had 2 children, and built a career in county emergency management. She did not discuss the Teague case publicly. But she had done something on the night of March 3, 2004, that she had never disclosed to anyone in the department, and that she would not disclose for 19 years. She had made a personal copy of the 911 tape, not the original. The original had been logged into evidence and had remained in the Dawson County Archive through 2 rounds of system migration that converted cassette-era recordings to digital storage. But Trish had held an audio cassette to the dispatch speaker and pressed record, the way people in 2004 sometimes did when they wanted to keep something they could not explain wanting to keep. The copy was poor. It was a recording of a recording played through a speaker into a handheld device. It was enough. She kept it in a shoebox in the closet of her home office for 19 years. She thought about it when she saw the Teague case mentioned, which was rarely. She thought about it when she didn't see it mentioned, which was often. In the fall of 2022, her oldest child came home from college with a course catalog that included a class in forensic audio analysis. Trish looked at the catalog. She looked at the shoebox. She made a decision she had been circling for nearly 2 decades. In January of 2023, Trish Holbrook contacted the Nebraska State Patrol's Cold Case Division and told them she had a personal copy of the March 3, 2004 dispatch tape from the Ruth Ann Teague case. She was told to bring it in. The tape was transferred to the State Crime Laboratory's Audio Forensics Unit in Lincoln. The unit had access to technology that had not existed in any form available to the Dawson County Sheriff's Department in 2004. Spectral analysis software capable of isolating vocal frequencies from background noise, layering amplitude patterns, and reconstructing speech from recordings that the human ear alone could not resolve. The process took 11 weeks. The analyst, a woman named Dr. Keiko Tanaka, worked with the 4-second segment in cycles of amplification, isolation, and spectral mapping. On March 22, 2023, 19 years and 19 days after the original call, Dr. Tanaka played the enhanced recording for the cold case detective assigned to the Teague file, a 40-year-old investigator named Sean Driscoll. The breath was there. Then the word. 1 word. 2 syllables. A name spoken with the controlled deliberateness of a woman who knew she had 4 seconds and chose to spend them on the one piece of information that mattered most. The name was Garrett. Detective Driscoll drove to Grand Island on the afternoon of March 23rd. He did not call ahead. He parked outside the address listed for Garrett Pruitt in the state database and sat in his vehicle for several minutes reviewing the file. Then, he went to the door. Pruitt answered. He was 66 years old, gray at the temples. Composed, Driscoll identified himself and stated the purpose of his visit. Pruitt looked at him the way a man looks at something he has been expecting and has rehearsed for. He said he had nothing to say. He closed the door. The investigation that followed lasted 9 months. Driscoll reconstructed everything Eberhardt had built and extended it with tools and databases that had not existed in 2004. Sandra Orozco, now living in Arizona, agreed to a full recorded interview for the first time. A second woman, in Casper, Wyoming, came forward after learning of the renewed investigation through a news article and disclosed a pattern of behavior from Pruitt in 1999 that mirrored, in its architecture, what Sandra had described. Cell tower records from March 3, 2004, records that had been requested by Eberhardt in 2004 but that the carrier had been unable to produce at the time due to data retention limitations, were recovered from a federal archive created under a 2008 Telecommunications Preservation Act. Those records placed Garrett Pruitt's phone within range of the Route 6 cell tower at 10:47 p.m. on March 3, 2004, 22 minutes before Ruth Ann's call. Ruth Ann Teague's remains were located in December of 2023 on a section of agricultural land 3 miles north of Overton that had been leased by a shell company whose registration, when traced through 4 layers of corporate filing, listed Garrett Pruitt as its sole managing member. The land had been purchased in February of 2004, 1 month before Ruth Ann disappeared. Garrett Pruitt was arrested at his Grand Island residence on January 8, 2024. He was 67 years old. He answered the door the same way he had answered it in March, composed, unhurried, with the steadiness of a man who had decided a long time ago how he was going to carry himself when the moment came. He was handcuffed. He said nothing. He was driven out of Grand Island in the early light of a January morning, and he did not look back at the house. The trial lasted 10 days. The prosecution presented the enhanced 911 recording, the cell tower data, the land purchase records, the forensic identification of Ruth Ann's remains, Sandra Orozco's testimony, and the testimony of the second woman from Casper. On the 6th day of testimony, the prosecution played the enhanced recording for the jury. 4 seconds of audio. A breath. Then a name spoken once, clearly, deliberately, by a woman who had known exactly who was in her house and had used the only seconds she had to say so. The courtroom was very quiet when the recording ended. The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict was unanimous, guilty of murder in the first degree. Garrett Pruitt was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He made no statement at sentencing. His attorney requested that the court note his client's long record of professional stability and community involvement. The judge noted it. Then, the judge imposed the sentence. Janet, Ruth Ann's sister-in-law, the woman who had heard Ruth Ann say she thought Garrett was not who she believed he was 68 years old when the verdict was read. She sat in the gallery with Ruth Ann's school photograph in her hands and did not look at Garrett Pruitt. She looked at the photograph. After the courtroom emptied, she told a reporter that Ruth Ann had tried to tell her that the words had been right there in the last phone call, "I'm taking care of it," and that Janet had not heard them for what they were. She said she would carry that for the rest of her life. She said that was what it was. Ruth Ann Teague was 63 years old in the year Garrett Pruitt was convicted, or she would have been if March 3, 2004 had been a different kind of evening. She never rotated the reading corner books in April. She never saw June the border collie grow old. She never washed the Silverado on another Sunday morning while Eldon Grieve listened for the hose and started his day. She never learned whether the students whose spelling tests she had graded and stacked beside the telephone that evening grew up to be the readers she had spent 22 years trying to make them. Those ordinary mornings, the hose, the coffee mug on the drying rack, the tomatoes in the side yard, the monthly book rotation no one had asked her to do, were what Garrett Pruitt had taken. Not a dramatic life, a careful one, A life built on showing up. Trish Holbrook was 45 years old when the verdict came in. She had kept the tape for 19 years. She had not known why, exactly, except that a 4-second call from a woman she had never met had stayed with her in the particular way that certain things stay with dispatchers, not as trauma, not as guilt, but as an open question that the body refuses to file away. She had pressed record on a handheld cassette player at a dispatch desk in Lexington, Nebraska, in March of 2004. Because she had heard something in that call, not the word, which she could not make out, but the way it had been said, the weight of it, and she had understood, without being able to articulate it, that 4 seconds was not an accident, that someone had chosen those 4 seconds carefully, that there was a name in that breath. She was right. We ask this of every case we bring you. What does it tell us about Ruth Ann Teague that she used her last 4 seconds to speak a name, not to scream, not to plead, but to leave a record, deliberately, for whoever was listening? What does it mean that the technology to hear what she said did not exist for 19 years, and that the only reason it could be applied at all was because a 26-year-old dispatcher on her overnight shift held a cassette to a speaker and pressed record? And what do you believe it says about the nature of danger, about the kind Garrett Pruitt represented, the kind that never raises its voice, that 3 women across 3 states recognized it, and that official systems, in every instance, required something more than recognition before they would act? Leave your answers below. We read every one. Justice found Ruth Ann Teague after 19 years. It found her because she used 4 seconds wisely, because a dispatcher trusted what she heard, and because a forensic analyst in a Lincoln laboratory spent 11 weeks pulling a name out of silence. Stories like Ruth Ann's are the reason this channel exists. If you believe that 4 seconds can be enough, that the truth survives even when the recording is poor and the years are long and no one was supposed to hear it, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.